Watching SA Today with me, Unati Bagyashe. Let's get into the story now. South Africa's finances will be boosted further with a 65 billion rands injection as the International Monetary Fund special drawing rights become effective today. Earlier this month, the IMF Board of Governors approved the general allocations of SDRs equivalent of $650 billion, the largest IMF emergency currency creation in history to tackle the COVID-19 global pandemic. Now, the newly created SDR is the first tranche since the $250 billion that was issued soon after the global financial crisis in 2009. For more, we joined by Max Alir from the IMF. Max, thank you so much for your time. Now, explain the difference between the first financial aid to the country, this time amounting to 70 billion rands, and the latest financial boost of 65 billion rands, please.
Good afternoon, Unati. There are two differences. The financing that was provided last year was an IMF loan provided to South Africa. We provided that kind of support to about 100 member countries. That was a loan. It didn't have any conditionality attached to it, but it was a loan from the IMF. In the case of the SDRs, which is taking place today, this is different. This is not a loan from the IMF. This is what we are doing today is basically we give to our member countries both an obligation, which is the SDR allocation, and at the same time, some reserve assets, which is basically the SDR holdings. These are resources that become available to the country. If the country does not use this allocation, then it balances the obligations with the holdings of SDRs. But member countries, depending on their needs, may use these resources for different purposes. It's up to the member country to decide how to use them. Can be either to hold them in international reserves, and that will make the reserves of the country be higher and a stronger buffer. Countries may need to use them. Some countries that find in difficult financing situation may need to use these resources to tackle COVID-19. But this is not a loan from the IMF. The country has, again, is an obligation and an asset, and these resources, if it is balanced, there are no interest payment, there are no obligation, nothing. If the country uses, then it will be on the difference or in the amount used that the country will be paying interest.
Now, Max, we understand that in order for African countries to rebuild their economies, they actually need, in essence, of $450 billion. And in fact, the IMF is giving SDRs to the equivalent of $33 billion. Explain to us what the concerns are from the African continent and the rationale for the $33 billion as opposed to what is actually needed. The distribution of the SDRs is done relative to the size of the quotas. That's the shares that our member countries hold in the IMF. So these 650 are distributed in that proportion. From the 650, for example, South Africa will receive 4.2, and as you said, Africa will receive 33 billion. This is less than what has been estimated the needs for the continent to get over the implication of the COVID crisis. However, there are discussions taking place at the level of the largest economy in the world to redirect the SDRs or part of the SDR that correspond to them to support African countries. In the latest meetings from the G7 and the G20, it's been discussed for the major advanced economies to redirect another 100 billion of their share to African countries. These are discussions that are ongoing, and hopefully they come to a fruitful conclusion in the coming month. And in that case, these countries will be transferring their allocation to African countries. But again, these are discussions that are still ongoing, but we expect to have a resolution in the coming month. Now, Max,
whilst you don't have, authority or jurisdiction to basically tell countries how to spend these finances or utilize them per se, especially if we're talking about international reserve assets. But we know that you've been monitoring what's been happening in South Africa as far as the unrest in July. What are just some of your concerns for, as the IMF, in terms of what is happening in the country on the ground that would be exacerbating the financial crisis outside of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, definitely, South Africa, I think South Africa already before COVID was in a challenging situation. The country had grown slowly for many years. In fact, income per capita had declined for a number of years. COVID has exacerbated the situation and these difficulties. We saw the civil unrest last month that caused concern. We have seen the reaction of the government. They have put a package to support the economy and the people and businesses that were affected. I think that falls into the context of what the government reaction is. Whether they use the SDRs that they received to pay for this package or not, that's a sovereign decision. They may use different sources of funding. We're not in the position or in the situation where we tell countries how to use the SDRs. What I would like to emphasize is that countries, this is a precious asset, precious resources for countries. So they need to use it smartly, use them effectively, use them in a transparent way and with accountability, so that whatever economic policies are financed with these resources do achieve the maximum benefit in terms of benefiting the population.
All right, Max, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. This is where we have to leave it. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.